Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be taking a look at the novel So Scary It Even Scared Stephen King. So bleak and so disturbing that even Stephen King didn't want to publish it. Yes, I'm talking about 1983's Pet Sematary. I'll be showing you the points to look for when trying to identify a first US and first UK edition of the book. The US first edition was published in 1983 by Doubleday. And here's the back cover. Interesting, there's a couple of states of the back cover. One says 1982 and one says 1983. I believe they are both generally considered to be first edition jackets. I don't think one takes precedent over the other. It's just an interesting little bit of trivia. Inside the jacket, look for a price of $15.95. And like other Doubleday first editions, they very helpfully on the copyright page plainly state first edition. So you have that, and you have that, you have a first edition. It's a little bit of additional flair from the time. For my dear sister Linda, with all my love, Ron, December 25th, 1983. Well, Ron was sure a sweet guy to give his dear sister Pet Sematary as a Christmas present in 1983. Man, what a thoughtful thing to do, Ron. Take the jacket off, and the book has wall-to-wall black cloth covered boards, which is pretty neat, pretty distinctive. Gold lettering on the spine, and Stephen King's signature printed in gold on the front cover. Altogether, a distinctive and pretty good looking book. The UK first edition was published by Hodder and Stoughton, the company that also published Christine, out of the ordinary pattern of Stephen King's UK editions of the day being published by MacDonald. So Christine was only published in 12,000 copies, and Pet Sematary was published in 15,000 copies, which, as far as 80s era Stephen King books go, makes it pretty rare. Inside the front jacket flap, look for a price of $8.95. $8.95 net in UK. And on the copyright page, look for the language. First printed 1983. There will be no other language about subsequent printings, just first printed 1983. Take the dust jacket off, and pretty identical to the Hodder and Stoughton edition of Christine. Just black paper covered boards all around with gold lettering on the spine. The UK jacket is pretty cool, and it's definitely novel to me, no pun intended. Sometimes I think the uniqueness weighs out for me, or wins out, because I didn't grow up looking at the UK editions. I was very familiar with the US edition, but overall, looking at them side by side, I have to say I prefer the US first edition artwork. There's just something about that cat with the green eyes and the red tongue that has freaked me out for a long time, as long as I can remember. The origin of Pet Sematary is sort of an interesting story. Stephen King never actually intended for the novel to be published. He decided that it was too dark, too bleak, too scary, too disturbing. And after he finished it in 1978, he put it away. It's all of the elements of the novel were there in his actual life. He, in 1978, was writer-in-residence at the University of Maine and moved his family into a house along a busy highway frequented by large trucks and neighbors said, keep your pets and keep your kids away from that road. And in fact, his daughter's cat did die, got hit by a truck, and they found the cat dead, and they buried it in a nearby pet cemetery, misspelled, similar to the way the title of the book is misspelled. And at one point, Stephen King's youngest child, his son Owen, was, I think, 18 months old, something like that, and was toddling toward the road, and he either tripped and fell, or Stephen King tackled him or caught him before he could reach the road. But all of these elements were actually in play in Stephen King's life, and he had the idea for the novel and started writing it. And he wrote a first draft, and he let it simmer or season in a drawer for 6 weeks, and he read it back, and he didn't like it. He recalls writing the novel and not particularly enjoying writing it. It spirals into darkness, and according to him, has a message to it that nothing works out and it's not worth trying, because in the end, we're all doomed anyway. And he said he didn't particularly care for that message because it's not something he personally believes. And his wife Tabitha is always the first person to read and critique his novels, and he has said that he writes them for her. She is his target audience, and she read it, she didn't like it, and he shared it with his friend Peter Straub. Peter Straub didn't like it, so Stephen King put it away and began work on The Dead Zone. So even though Pet Sematary was released eventually in 1983, as far as when it was written, it actually slots in between The Stand and The Dead Zone. A little bit of trivia. But fast forward a few years, and Stephen King, in a TV interview, let it drop that he had written this novel, and word got out, and there was a lot of interest for it. But that didn't sway him from his belief that it should not be published, that it was too disturbing. But he, what finally did cause him to change his mind was actually an ongoing contractual dispute with his first publisher, Doubleday. Now, under their royalty sharing system or scheme, most authors would probably do just fine. But they would dole out royalties to the amount of $50,000 a year and invest the rest. But by the time Stephen King left Doubleday for Viking, he had millions of dollars in retainer. It would have taken more than his whole life to pay out the royalties at $50,000 a year. And he worked with his agent, Kirby McCauley, to try to renegotiate the contract or dissolve that and get Stephen King paid the royalties that he was owed. And Doubleday said, okay, well, we want 2 novels. And Stephen King said, I'll give you 1 novel. And they said, okay. And he had his 1 novel, Pet Sematary, that was unassigned and just sitting in a drawer, not doing anything. So he talked to Tabitha, and she said it was okay. So he agreed to allow Doubleday to publish Pet Sematary in 1983, and he said he would not do any publicity for it, but it was released, and the anticipation was so high that it sold 600,000 copies or some amazing thing, and has since gone on to achieve legendary status. But importantly to Stephen King, it did resolve his contract with Doubleday, freed up his royalties, and I'm sure he made plenty of money on Pet Sematary as well. And in fact, the novel is dedicated to Kirby McCauley, who worked some magic to get everything resolved as far as the contract with Doubleday. Kirby McCauley, for all I've read about him, seems like he was an amazing agent, and this is one of my favorite Kirby's magic stories. Anyway, so it was released in 1983, and a movie came thereafter in the 80s. And this was one that I hadn't read until the last few years. I had avoided it like so many things, and now I wonder why. What the heck was I thinking? But actually, when I think about the hype that it's the book that was so scary, it even scared Stephen King. I read it and I was nervous, but it kind of brings into relief how, even though he's considered a horror novelist, a horror writer, a lot of his novels have some horrific elements, but aren't like punch you in the gut horror that some other authors specialize in. Stephen King is slightly more genteel, maybe. He doesn't go spiraling down into the darkness in the gutter. And Pet Sematary is unique in that he does. It gets dark, and then it gets darker, and there are some heart-wrenching scenes, and then it gets darker, and it gets darker still, and then it just dives headfirst into madness and despair. And even though you can kind of see where the book is going, it sort of forecasts what will come with its own internal logic. It is harrowing, and you can't turn away. I'm not going to say I enjoyed it. It always seems weird to lavish that type of lighthearted praise on a book that is this bleak, but I did admire it. I respected the heck out of it. It kind of reminded me of Cujo in a sense that it just gets darker and it's sort of relentless, except that Cujo sort of lets you breathe at the end. And Pet Sematary I really admire because it goes all the way. It doesn't pull any punches. And the last line, which I won't read here and give it away, but is just one of the most chilling things that I've ever read in a Stephen King novel. And the US edition, this cover image was reused on the Signet paperback edition, which were the editions that I was most familiar with as a kid because they were hella cheaper, and that was hella cheap was the amount of money I usually had for buying things. So I think this one gets the edge for me just because I'm so familiar with this. Like I said earlier, that cat face has freaked me out for a long time. The UK edition, also a cool looking book. They look good together on the shelf. And while I didn't care for Christine, I did very much. I do like Pet Sematary, and I would definitely consider it at least top 20 Stephen King, maybe top 10. But anyway, thanks as always for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed this and found it useful. I will talk to you later. Bye.